Hello, everyone. That is not the proper intro, is it? Let me having some real technical issues. Really technical issues. Let me slip out of here for a second. I'll put the usual music on and everything, and I want to check on a couple things, and then I'll be right back. That's how we'll do it. Okay. Aspirational hero. Move that move that aspirational, move that move that aspirational, move that move that move that move that aspirational, move that move that aspirational, move that move that aspirational goal. So the aspirational heroes need to be there. They need to be pure 100% from the beginning. They need to be at that unattainable goal of perfection and good and hopeful and inspirational and all of that. Move that move that move that aspirational, move that move that move that aspirational, move that move that move that move that move that aspirational, move that aspirational. Stop deconstructing heroes. Aspirational are cathartic, motivational. Move that move that move that move that aspirational, 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 move that move that move that to aspire. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Office Hours live stream, and welcome to another Saturday night. I'm excited about that. I'm Professor Geek, and thanks for putting up with all the technical difficulties we had. I still don't know exactly how much of it was actually StreamYard being weird and how much of it was maybe me a little bit. I'm really fried. This was a big, difficult week. Not just like nothing in particular, just really suffering that end of semester burnout too. And I'm a little scattered, so we'll see how this stream goes. But yeah, so I'd set up a stream on StreamYard, and I clicked, process it, set the time, set the everything, and I went over and opened another tab for YouTube. That's how I usually do it, so I can bounce back and forth between StreamYard and YouTube. And I saw the stream on YouTube, so I opened it up. I saw a number of some people were there already, some people were commenting, and then it was time to start entering into StreamYard. So I went over to StreamYard, and suddenly I couldn't see it. It said like there's an error with the stream or whatever. So I refreshed it, and it wasn't showing me the stream. So it was really weird. It was like YouTube saw the stream, but StreamYard pretended it didn't exist. So I had to set up the stream again, tell everybody, hey, come over to this other one. So you're here now. Hopefully no one's hanging out in the dead stream. I did delete it, but I mean, if their tab is still open, I don't know how that would work. So anyway, we've risen above it, and we are here. So now I will say too that for tonight we'll see how well the topic goes. As I said, I'm scattered, but let me welcome you guys first. Now I know that before in the other stream, I think it was Ghost Planet. Chances are, as Team Ghost Planet or Ghost Planet Max Inc. or whatever is usually the first there. So welcome to you. I know Eldritch fan popped by. Looks like you were here too. I think Dark Enigma said something like the vampire mirror. Ironic. What? Yeah, I mean, that's done on purpose. Good eye. So welcome here, Nathaniel's Lowsball, Ghost Planet Max Inc., as I said, the imaginative hobbyist, Final Fantasy fan, Electric Barbarella 27, Mike Deere, Sweet Sound Engraver, as usual, Leia Plus Size, Crispy channel member, great to see you. Hello, AL. I think Big Al popped over into the other stream as well to say hello, but again, had to change that over. Ed Star, good to see you there. Channel member. Fizchozo Corner. And Eldritch fan here for a super chat. Let me click that right out of the gate. See if I can find it over here. StreamYard's cooperating. Yeah, I said let the right one in. Can't talk about vampires without mentioning that. Also a great villain origin story, but horrifying that people think it's a love story with a happy ending. Man, never underestimate people's ability to try to just make weird sentimental connections to horror stories or to monsters, that's where Twilight came from, that same kind of sentiment or idea. It's bizarre, but thank you for the super chat, and thank you for hopping around there, and yeah, let the right one in. Classic vampire film. Let's see who else has popped in here. Yeah, there's too many vampire films to really talk about all of them. I'll explain what I mean by kind of the vampire mirror and what I'm thinking about a little bit as we go through. I'll just try to say you understand why the main character chooses to go with the vampire. She gives him purpose. It makes him feel powerful, but how he'll end up. Yeah, it's pretty clear. But no, it's like Harley Quinn and Joker. OMG, relationship goals. All right. Got everything there. So, yeah, it's an idea that I've had or I've been thinking about. I mean, I've done some scholarship on vampires. I've done a whole video on vampires, numbers of them, actually. And we might touch into that a little bit here again. But lately, I've had kind of vampires on the brain because if you caught, I did release episode 3 of the Iconicast podcast this past week. And the second segment of that is a review of the Fright Night 4K Steelbox that I picked up recently. And I talk about, somewhat about the 4K translation. And then I also talk about the story as well. I do a little analysis of the story and I say some things about the vampire story, which I'll probably rehash a little bit here just to kind of get us on the same page. Pardon my Diet Pepsi here. Should open that beforehand. I used to be known on the streams for drinking the Diet Dr. Pepper before they changed the formula. And I would always have one on the streams way back when we used to do office hours the old way. And it got to the point where people knew that crack sound. So I would, when the stream was starting, I would have the can up to the mic and I would open the can with everything black and then it would fade into me. That used to be the signature tune in.
before I had the videos, before Stephen Cruz made all those cool songs. So thinking about Fright Night, I did a kind of a deep dive because when I, as a one of the things you learn when you're doing academic research is that you want to look at everything pertaining to the topic that you're researching because you never know what might be sort of relevant. Now, I couldn't just watch every vampire movie, but I did go a deep dive into Fright Night, and I watched, of course, rewatched the 85 or 86 film. I read the novelization that was originally released, the original novelization, which is interesting because novelizations are usually based on the script because they need to start writing the book. So they take the script. But if you know anything about making movies, you've got the script. By the time you get to actually making the film, by that time when you're actually on location with the cameras, there's usually a shooting script that's evolved a little bit from the script. And then as you're there on the fly making the film, you make even further changes, and then you film stuff, and then the editor gets a hold of it. So the actual end result film can be a bit different than the script, the original script that was greenlit by the studio and so forth. So it's always interesting to read novelizations and see how much the story's changed a bit. And Fright Night did change. For example, in the novelization, Charlie Brewster is just as much of a horror film fanatic and geek, like in terms of knowing all the minutia. He's just as much of one as Evil Ed. In the movie, they changed it a little bit to where he has to go and ask Evil Ed, "How do you kill a vampire?" And you think, well, shouldn't you know that? I mean, Peter Vincent's supposedly your hero. You're watching Fright Nights, you're watching vampire movies and stuff. But you get the idea in the movie, which I think was a better play, that Charlie isn't really focused or fully committed to any one thing in life when you first meet him. He's sitting there. He's making out with Amy. He's trying to get her bra off. She's saying stop. He's not really listening to her. She says, "Look, your hero's on TV, Peter Vincent." He's like not really paying attention to that, even though it's something he loves. And it's not until he realizes there's a vampire next door, and until he realizes and actually meets the women who are being victimized and being killed, that he's just like laser focused. I mean, he's committed like he's never been committed to anything to his life to stop this vampire, and everybody around him thinks he's crazy and he's weird. So it's a neat little example of how a story can change from the script to the end result. And I thought that was a good one. I talk about the novelization because I know that Tom Holland wrote at some point after the movie, he wrote a novelization called Fright Night Origins. And it's kind of like his version. It's his novel version of the film, but it also expands the universe a bit more because he was wanting to write more novels at the time. He's talked about maybe wanting to do more films. There are comics that he has kind of given his blessing on in terms of canon because, they made a sequel to Fright Night in '89, but Tom Holland wasn't attached to any of that. He didn't have anything to do. I think he was doing Child's Play at the point. But they did bring back Ragsdale. They brought back Roddy McDowall and everybody. And it was an interesting sequel. It is. It's they released it on DVD once, but it was formatted for the TV screen. It wasn't, the natural widescreen or whatever. And you can't really find it. You can find pirated versions of it a little bit easier now. It's on YouTube, actually. Someone put the whole movie on YouTube. But again, it's that formatted for your screen, which drives me crazy. But it was a good film. Again, it wasn't, you can see it. You can see it definitively leave behind some of the themes and some of the feel that Tom Holland started the story with Fright Night, but it develops its own thing and is actually quite good. It's directed by Wallace is his name. He's the guy who did the It television special, the 1990 It, my favorite, the miniseries. He also directed Halloween 3, the Season of the Witch, the little kind of more anthology series. So, yeah, interesting. So I watched those two. And then I know that it was remade. It was remade in 2011 with Colin Firth as the vampire, for all things. And I never bothered watching it when it came out because I was like, I'm not interested in that. That's going to be garbage. I watched it now, though, because I'm watching everything, that pertains to Fright Night when I was doing that review of it. And I'm glad I watched it. I might watch it again. It's got a great cast. I mean, Colin Firth does a great vampire, but he's so different. He's not the real Jerry Dandridge. They took away the elegance of the vampire. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit because how we kind of change vampires with the times and whatnot. But he was more bestial and that you might think, well, that's got its advantages. I don't know. I think it ultimately hurt the story, but great. Tony Collette, Anton Yelchin was his name, the actor who passed away in the teens. What's the guy? McLovin from Superbad was Evil Ed. But the coolest actor, or the coolest part of that movie, the remake, was David Tennant playing Peter Vincent. And it was interesting because Peter Vincent is supposed to be a ex horror film star. Like a Peter Cushing was the idea that Holland was basing the character off of, and Roddy McDowall was a great character to play it. Peter Vincent, the character's name is from Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And so it's supposed to be this old star of these old horror films like Hammer Horror or whatever, who's now doing a late night horror host, theme show every week, for showcasing a different horror film, some of his own and whatnot. So it was a great idea. We don't, even back in 2011, which is hard to believe that's over 10 years ago now, we don't even have there are horror hosts, but they're sort of niche, like online webisode kind of things or whatever. We don't really have anything like that. So when they were remaking the film, David Tennant, who played Peter Vincent, played a Chris Angel style Vegas showman, who was an illusionist and all this stuff. But his shtick, like his thing, was he was a vampire specialist, and his show was all about vampires and stuff. Cool idea. David Tennant's gonna bring a wonderful performance to just about anything he does, and he was great. He was great, and was a cool character. Wasn't anything like the real Peter Vincent though. So I watched that, and it was interesting. Then I didn't even know anything about going into it, but in 2013, they did a Fright Night 2, subtitle New Blood. And so, okay, this is 2013. I thought it was going to be a sequel to the Fright Night from 2011. It's not, though. It's I don't know why they called it Fright Night 2, but it's really a reimagining of the story. It's not even a remake of the Fright Night 2 they did in 89. It's kind of a reimagining of the tale, and it takes some kind of elements from part 2, but mostly part 1. The premise of this one is it's no longer set in suburban, wherever, California or Las Vegas or whatever, like the remake was. This one, you've got Charlie, Ed, and Amy. I think they're college students, and they're on a study abroad semester or whatever, and they're in Romania, and they're actually studying art history and whatnot in Romania. So they get in their hotel and like the universities across the road or whatever. But in the hotel across the road from Charlie and Ed's room, they can see into this woman's room. And Jerry Dandridge is now a woman, Geri. And you would think, oh, are you kidding me? No, the reason they did it is because whereas the original Fright Night takes some cues, from Dracula, obviously, they wanted to try making her a Countess Bathory type character. If you know anything about Countess Bathory, she is one of the possible inspirations for Bram Stoker. He clearly took the name of Vlad Dracul, Vlad the Impaler, and took some elements of his ferocity and whatnot. But the whole idea of drinking blood or taking the blood of your victims, it was really a Countess Bathory thing, also from the same location there that Bram Stoker was studying for Dracula. So, she's a possible influence for that too. So they thought, let's try this. And she's like this art professor. He gives the classes at night, obviously. And it's obviously, Fright Nights have always kind of had this sexy aspect to them, but this one obviously ramps that up big time. But it's really interesting. I didn't expect it to entertain me. It has some really cheesy parts to it. It was a direct-to-DVD film. But the performances, for the most part, were pretty good. The guy playing Peter Vincent didn't really impress me much. But it was interesting what they did with Peter Vincent in that film. He went from being an old horror film star, horror host, to a Vegas showman. And now in this one made a lot of sense. He was a ghost hunter online. So like Ghost Adventures or the Ghost Hunters or whatever, all the paranormal shows. And they actually shot it really well. It was a pretty cool parody of all of those shows because they're all in black and white, and it's one guy with the green like nighttime camera. Oh, did you hear that? Oh my gosh, what's that? And stuff and running around. That was actually pretty funny. That was a really cool idea to if you're going to do a reimagining of it, going that way with Peter and Vincent was I thought pretty inventive. But so a lot of things otherwise were different with it, for that film. One of the things I was saying in my review that I did of the movie, on the Iconicast podcast episode 3. I'll re-release it as its own segment. The Fright Night stuff. But I said, I really appreciated Fright Night because historically, when that came out in '85, I was 5 years old, so I wasn't watching that or any vampire movie, at 5 years old. But looking back now, it was Tom Holland really wanted to bring back the classic vampire because at that point, I've got George Hamilton's Love at First Bite there in the thumbnail. That was a parody of vampire movies. It was sort of a joke, kind of thing, like a scary movie kind of thing or something. That those parody films, and Tom Holland didn't like seeing that because he grew up a fan of the classic monster movies and everything, and so he did this movie as kind of a love letter to classic vampire fans, and it's such a great movie. Peter Vincent even talks about they fire him from his horror host show at one point in the movie, and he says it's because of this new generation. Everybody just wants the slashers, wants the hack and slash. No one wants the real gravity and the the tradition of all of this, and I think that's kind of a meta statement in the film because the movie does go back, not just go back to vampire, but it goes back to full vampire where it's the crucifix hurts the vampire, holy water can kill a vampire, obviously sunlight, stake through the heart, garlic, all these normal things are usual things. But it got me thinking because when I watched the film, I was 12-ish, 13-ish maybe. I don't know exactly when. I could do some research because the Interview with the Vampire had come out, the film. And I was really just kind of like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Back in the day, I went through like a vampire phase and I was reading the books, Anne Rice's books and stuff. But those vampires were a real change. They were a shift away from the classic vampire. It was almost a more biological kind of explanation for them. Not really. If you read the whole Vampire Chronicles or whatever, as far as I read at that point anyway, some spirit gets like tainted into this queen's blood, and the spirit is like in the blood, so that's what's turning people into vampires when they share their blood or whatever. So other than that supernatural, very clearly supernatural element, a lot of the changes were they're sort of defined by almost biological means, like in the body does this, and then when the body changes here, it does this because of this and everything. And it was a very different take on vampires, whereas the traditional vampire has always been straight up the monster, the anti-god monster, the unholy creature, which is why the holy objects affect it. And we'll talk about the origin of the vampire idea in a second. So I thought that was cool that in the time that I was watching Interview with the Vampire, and a lot of vampire movies that were made since then, there's always one really stupid cliche scene in modern vampire movies that I always hate. I'm like, oh, you're so funny. It's unoriginal, and it's I don't like what it's saying either. It's always a scene in a vampire movie where somebody takes a cross or whatever and holds it up to the vampire, and the vampire's like, you're so superstitious. You've been reading too many books or whatever, and just holds a cross or throws it away like it doesn't hurt them at all because silly religion. How can that have any effect on us monsters? And that's really how a lot of people almost prefer their stories, which I think is absurd. That takes away the very foundation of a lot of these monsters. So I thought it was cool, when a lot of that was going on, to be able to watch Fright Night, which was straight up all about good versus evil, and the holy objects work on the vampire. In fact, in Fright Night, there's the great scene, our great moment where Peter Vincent holds out a crucifix towards Jerry Dandridge, and the vampire and the vampire starts to laugh. And he says, you've got to have faith for that to work. And, Peter Vincent actually finds it in himself. He gathers himself with faith later and holds it up. And it actually, it's terrifying. It's driving the vampire away. So I love that aspect. You got to have faith for that to work. It's got to be intended for this, and that's, I love listening to actual Catholic exorcists talk about what they do. And there are real correlations with like some of what they do with sacramentals or relics and stuff like that, when they're dealing with exorcisms to the vampire story. It's pretty interesting. So that's important. Vampires, I think, and our monsters in general, unless you're telling a story about like Quasimodo, which is fine, someone who's perceived as monstrous but really isn't, or even Frankenstein's monster. You want to do a biological monster, do Frankenstein, because that original novel was wonderful. Notes of Paradise Lost, and he's as a creature, he's trying to love. And I won't spoil the book or for you, but you really should go and read the original novel. There's a moment where you really are rooting for him to be a good guy, get it. But then people are so off-putting by his figure; they treat him as a villain. And there's a really cool line. I don't think it was in the original book, but it was in the Kenneth Branagh film where Robert De Niro played the creature, and he said, "Within me is great is there. There is both great love and great hatred within me, and if I cannot fulfill the one, I will satisfy the other." Meaning if he can't find love, he's going to give vent to his anger and violence, and he's a pretty wicked creature. So, you got monsters like that, but the vampire. What's so fascinating to me about vampires in general is that they started out as sort of the DNA of every classic monster we think of from the movies. I mean, the werewolf comes from the vampire story. The zombie comes from the vampire story. Ghouls come from the vampire story. The original idea of a vampire, and it varied a little bit from geographical location to geographical location, but they were sort of undead walking at night. They would feed on the living, usually by drinking blood, but they could also shapeshift, so in the original Dracula novel, he shapeshifts not only to a bat but also a wolf. It's so cool. It was so you can see, like I said, so much DNA of cool monster stories packed into that original idea of the vampire. It was only a matter of time before it was broken off in more digestible forms. Like, I love a good classic werewolf story, and I think I'm so glad that it evolved to what it is rather than staying with the vampire idea. So much so to the point where in Fright Night 2, there's sort of a little team of vampires, and each of them has a likeness to an animal. There's a cat-like one. There's the bat one. But then this one is basically a werewolf. I mean, he's not called a werewolf, and he's there with the vampire coven. So you assume he's just a vampire who, likes to change into wolves mostly or whatever. But he really is treated like a werewolf, straight up. So it was kind of a neat little testament to that fact that, all these monsters came from the original idea of the vampire. So I'm all over the place tonight, but I'm just kind of giving myself the freedom to geek out and go in whatever direction my my mind wants to take me, because I am so fried. But we get all these monsters from the original idea of the vampire, and it's really telling and fascinating to me to see how our perception of the vampire changes throughout the ages. Some people will tell you, the vampire used to be a monster, and he's supposed to be monsters, and all this stupid Twilight or even Anne Rice stuff, that's just, they romanticized it and they ruined it. Okay. That's not quite accurate. There's a lot of romance in the original Bram Stoker's Dracula book. Romance, I mean, like the romanticism, that kind of idea. Dracula is way more monstrous. He's terrifying to behold. And yet there is this, right there in the story, the story of this, and imagine this tale being told to repressive Victorian England, a story of a stranger. Young ladies, this dark stranger will sneak into your home, into your bedroom at night, and he will look down on your bared flesh, your neck, and the sight will arouse a hunger in him, so much so that a part of his body will suddenly start to grow, his fangs, and then he penetrates you with that part of his body, and there's an exchange of fluids, and there, it's a very, on one hand, it's always had that sexual metaphor into it from the beginning. Now, it's not just that, and the big problem for romanticized vampires, Twilight is the perfect example of the end result of that slippery slope, is that you just kill the story. You're just telling a girl falls for the bad guy who wants to be good story, and you just happen to use vampires. It's got more in common with West Side Story, I think, than any kind of Dracula story or vampire story. So, where was I? Okay, so the evolution of how they're portrayed, you know, I think there's something pretty telling to the fact that you start to see that stupid scene in vampire movies where, oh, the cross, where'd you read that? That doesn't hurt us or whatever. And what still does hurt a vampire is usually sunlight that stays, or fire, and those are just very physics based ways to kill a vampire. You know, like if you literally consume the body that the creature inhabits, it's a ghost. Then it's not a vampire if it survives at all. You know, so they fall back on very sort of physics based ways of killing a vampire, which really just does away with any aspect of God. Or if you don't, or you can still just contextualize it is the supernatural good. Any good classic monster story worth its salt has to acknowledge that there's definite evil, but there's also definite good. You know, I touched on this a bit in my last stream, and I just recently cut that out as its own video too. One of the things you see, and one of the I think reasons for and consequences of people trying to take away the villainousness of a villain, or take away the severity of them, or take away some of the terror of them, is the fact that they can't, if they fully acknowledge full-on elemental evil, then you have to acknowledge full-on elemental good. And traditionally that's always been, God, however you want to conceive of him. And that's, the vampire story is a classic example of that. It's just perfect. Even silver from the silver bullet of a werewolf, is usually comes from the idea of silver's the purity of the metal, but silver is often commonly used in high church and sacramentals and stuff like that. You can also go back to the silver pieces that Judas had to give or was paid. So there are all these religious elements to it. And so you take away the elemental evil, you take away the elemental good, and you can kind of look back and see steps in this progression. One of the things I find interesting is Stephen King's writings. Stephen King just can't bring himself to it's funny watching him try to handle this. I'm thinking specifically of three stories. I'm thinking of Stephen King's It, Salem's Lot, and Needful Things. All right, so you've got a pretty evil elemental villain in all of those, right? You've got Dracula himself, Barlow. You've got this Lovecraftian entity, ancient entity from space, It, and then you've also got the devil himself, in Needful Things. So you have definite elemental evils in those stories, and the person to really combat that evil, or the representation of the opposite force, is never any kind of preacher or anybody related or associated with God. In fact, in Salem's Lot, there is a priest, but he's having like a crisis of faith. Okay, fine. But it has to be what's so funny in Salem's Lot is it's basically an analog for Stephen King himself, right? A young writer, teacher guy, who's very just, he's level-headed, and it was the sheriff, I think, in Needful Things, who's a very smart man, so like what is the weakness, or what's the combat for the devil? Well, just somebody who's very smart and sees what's going on, and that kind of, there's a little more to it than that, but no, that doesn't really make any sense. I think It comes the closest to really selling the idea, because you have the magic of childhood friendship, the innocence of that being something that can combat the evil or the monster. And I think that works pretty well, especially from the roots that he gathered that story from. But you still have the supernatural good, you call it the turtle or whatever in It, who's trying to help them, in some way. And there's even hints at something even bigger than the turtle, because there's a magic that they share, in their friendship. So that came to the closest, because you're also, even though he didn't have to say directly God or innate good, he's dealing with a universally understood purity and innocence of childhood, especially childhood friendships. So that kind of makes it work. But it's funny to see these authors, our filmmakers, really try and come to terms with the fact that we don't want to mention God. They don't even want to, any kind of idea of God. And it's gotten to the point now where monster stories straight up ridicule certainly the Catholic Church, but other kind of religious uh, representations as well. So I think that hurts these horror stories, these monster stories, and it makes them fall into the aspect or to the strain of films where, I talked in the last stream about the problem of too many sympathetic villains. Another problem, which isn't quite as prevalent as the too many sympathetic villains, but another problem with monster movies or horror stories is that they just kind of go full on nihilistic. Like, the monster's killing everybody. He's going to kill everybody. If anybody survives, it's probably just for about a day before they die too. It's just that those kind of movies don't really. What are you even trying to say with that? I think to some small degree, there's a catharsis that those movies can fulfill for people. But I've never really understood that kind of slasher movie enthusiast idea, where like, oh, I love horror film. I'm always watching, oh, the more they chop somebody up, the better. I mean, I think, like I said, there can be some sort of measured catharsis. Maybe somebody can get out of that. It's not really something appealing to my psychological makeup. But people who just get off on watching that stuff over and over and over and every day, I really am at a loss to understand what the appeal is there. Other than that it's just sort of some sort of tribalism, like I identify as a horror fan, because I love a good monster movie. I love a good, you might even call it a horror movie if it's a really good contextualization of good versus evil, if it's a really good portrayal of that battle. And it doesn't mean that good has to win in the end every single time. Sometimes you can sort of make a statement about, the good guys didn't win in this one because they lost their faith or because they took this misstep or something. You can tell some sort of lesson of it if you want. As I said before, I said no number of times, I love the original Halloween, which is kind of ironic because this is considered the first slasher film by some people. I don't really see it as a slasher movie. I mean, you don't see much blood or guts or anything in that movie. It's really a story about the elemental evil. It's a story about the elemental boogeyman, as I've said in previous video. And they can't find him at the end. And John Carpenter's original idea was that's because evil's always out there. The boogeyman, so to speak, is always out there. Laurie Strode escapes. She's okay. But the evil is still out there. That's the idea. So, I wasn't crazy with the deal of the sequels and stuff. But, if a monster movie's going to work, I don't know. You guys can tell me. I know some of you here. I know, horror is one of those crazy popular franchises. It's like almost right up there with anime. There's always, people very, very proud of loving horror films. And again, I'm not anti-horror films. I like quite a few of them quite a bit myself. But I just never understood this, need to watch or even glory in sort of the low grade, B movie level gore, for no reason, just because you like it. That's just kind of, I don't know, that kind of concerns me a bit. But you can tell me if you're one of those people what you get out of it. I like stories about good versus evil. I think it's in horror films or monster movies, as I kind of call them, because those are the ones I gravitate more towards, are just a perfect example of how you can take fiction to use it to recontextualize a real world struggle. And they're great. I love that. So that's kind of my ideas. I've got some more to say, but I'll see where it kind of takes me. But I can pop into the chat here too and see if you guys have questions or whatever. I haven't really watched a lot. I don't watch recent films really at all, so I don't really know. I guess maybe the most recent vampire movie would be The Last Voyage of the I'm blanking. The ship that Dracula rode to London on in the novel. I'm blanking on the name of it, but they did a movie released last year. Maybe some of you saw it. I have not seen it yet. I heard one. What's the name of it, guys? You guys know. You're always usually correcting me in the chat. Let me. Gonna let me down. I'm gonna have to look it up myself. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. That's right, the Demeter. Which is interesting because Demeter being the Greek god of grains and health and flourishing, it's interesting that would be the ship that Dracula would come to London on. I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard things about it. That maybe it's kind of it flows a little bit too much into the woke, like it becomes sort of a metaphor for the treatment of minority. I don't know. That's just one person I heard say that. He might be totally off base. It might be really cool. I don't know. I do like the idea of taking that picture of the Dracula novel that we get in terms of flashback of the captain's log, but that's a pretty cool setup to the tension's all there to tell a good horror story. Okay, Leia Plus Size confirms it. The Last Voyage of the Demeter is not good, and yes, there is some woke there. You can't ignore it. Yeah, and I'm very highly sensitive to any kind of woke garbage like that. Yeah. So this interesting chat here from Samuel Proctor. Good to see you, Samuel Proctor, channel member. Said, have you ever heard of the Stephen King? Actually, I'm going to call you out. I'll put the screen up. Have you ever heard of the Stephen King short story Night Flyer? That's on my reading list, but I do know it's a vampire story. I have never read the story, but I did see the film they made of it with, I think it was Phoebe Cates, wasn't it? Who played in that. And it was interesting. Yeah, like a vampire who was like an amateur pilot, and he used that to kind of like fly away from the sun, which was kind of interesting, I think. I'm not ruining it for you. Don't worry. I know you said you haven't read it yet. That's my sort of vague memory seeing the movie back in the day. But yeah, I'd like to read the short story, actually, just to see. I remember as a teenager, I think that's when I saw it, not being crazy impressed with it, but found it interesting anyway. So I'd like to watch it again or read the story again to see what it's interesting, or see if it's resonates or whatever. So yeah, other than Voyage of the Demeter, I don't know if they're, and I don't even know how they handled Dracula in that movie. I can't imagine they'd be holding crucifixes up to him, but who knows. I just think people have forgotten how to write a good monster movie. I was so freaking excited when they announced that Universal was going to bring back the monster movies as its own shared universe. In some ways the original shared universe with all the crossovers they did back in the day. I thought that was such a good idea. Oh my gosh, such a cool idea. And it was just such a crying shame that they didn't have a single person who knew what they were doing in charge of that universe, because you got the Mummy movie, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie, which I don't even care about watching. And it just apparently it wasn't very good, but it also just showed so many misunderstandings of these monsters and why they resonate with culture. Not that you can't make one a woman here or there, or whatever. That's been done. Countess, daughter of Dracula, was one of the classic Universal films. So a female mummy, whatever, maybe it could work. But they just didn't know what they were doing, and then they started to change, and eventually you got, it wasn't Universal. Who was it? Those idiots who are ruining the Halloween movies now. I forget the name of them, but they did the Invisible Man film, which was just a thinly veiled attempt to talk about how bad men are, and men are toxic, and this man's a toxic abuser, and it's just garbage. So people don't know, because the biggest monster in a woke person's mind is Donald Trump. Oh my gosh, that's the boogeyman under all of their beds, and they're so literal. The woke agenda, the ideologues are so literal with their storytelling that they've completely forgotten that story is supposed to be a recontextualization of everyday struggles or real world things, not direct allegories, not thinly veiled attempts to call attention to this issue or that or whatever. So they're even their quote unquote monster stories or horror stories, suffer for it. I did see the Blumhouse, yeah, that's the name of it. Rob Zombie did this remakes before, that was like in the 90s, wasn't it? But Blumhouse was the one that totally they just wreck everything they do now. I did watch their first Halloween. I forget what that Halloween one was called, but it was the big deal because they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis, and it was an interesting idea because it was a direct sequel to the first movie, it didn't acknowledge the second one. So Laurie Strode wasn't Michael Myers' sister or any of that. And I thought that was such a cool idea. What a great opportunity. And they dropped it. They bombed it. It was a horrid film, top to bottom. It was nothing but girl power. Let's talk about feminism throughout the entire stinking film. It was just trash, garbage. So yeah, they're big on this list of just completely not understanding how monster movies work. Let's see. I'm getting rid of super chat, but I did see one chat here. Udias Lee says 2 questions. What is your favorite horror film, and have you watched X-Men '97? You mean X-Men like the Disney? I'll never watch Disney's garbage X-Men. I don't watch Disney, anything new from Disney. No. So no to that. Absolutely not. What is my favorite horror film? That's hard. Not that I love horror films, but I like a lot of those classic monster movies. So the Universal movies, or I love Hitchcock's Psycho. I mean, that's just classic itself. I don't know. That's a hard one. I gave you some of them in there anyway. Some of them there that I like. Studio 96 Films, thank you for the super chat. Say modern horror films focuses too much on gore or spectacle rather than putting substance to the story. Yeah, that's the thing. And I'm not really a fan of gore. I think if you can use it. I mean, Fright Night used it. Fright Night was cutting edge effects in its day, practical effects too, with actually the plaster and the all that stuff, and it's some gory scenes. It's kind of funny to watch now because it doesn't, the effects have come so far away. But I don't think you need the gore. And like I said, the first Halloween film is terrifying, and you maybe see a little blood. That's about it. You don't really see guts and everything like that, or anything. Those came later with like the I don't know what's the name, the chainsaw movies and whatnot. Of course, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, blood can be pretty symbolic, so you would expect to see that in a monster movie in some which way or another, as much as they can. But yeah, I think it's become a crutch for a lot of storytellers. Storytellers don't know how to do suspense anymore. They don't know how to do, because they're dealing with an audience that can't pay attention long enough to experience suspense. I mean, imagine the TikTok generation today. If they even get the hint of suspense, they'll get bored, because I want to know something you're not telling me. Click, do something else or whatever. It's just no. Yeah, there's so many obstacles for modern day horror films. I don't know. I don't watch really any of them. But Tom Spiegel, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Said, I personally disagree with the question, what's your favorite horror film? The proper way to phrase it is to switch to a Ghostface voice and say, what's your favorite scary movie? I don't think I did the Ghostface voice. Can't remember that off the top of my head now. But I get the reference. That was good. Scream 1 was just classic. I didn't like Scream 2. I thought it was an interesting idea, but I just don't like the way they took it. I think Scream just needed to be Scream. That was it. I did like a lot of Wes Craven's, the stuff that came from his ideas. I mean, I liked the first Nightmare on Elm Street. Fascinating idea. This dream, boogeyman that comes to you in your dreams or whatever. Fascinating idea. And I liked his New Nightmare too. Long before they did the remakes or even Freddy versus Jason or anything like that, Wes Craven did New Nightmare. Now, if you know anything about the Friday, and you guys know, I'm sure, the Friday the 13th series Nightmare on Elm Street series. I get them mixed up. The Nightmare on Elm Street series, Wes Craven created it, directed the first one, and then he left the franchise. A bunch of other people, they did that joke about it in Scream anyway. But then he did come back to kind of finish out the series, or so we thought before, the verses and the remakes and all that kind of stuff happened. But he did a really cool movie, and the premise of it was called New Nightmare, and it had Heather Langenkamp came back, Robert Englund, obviously. But the idea was that they were done making, in the movie, the actors played themselves, and Wes Craven played himself. So the idea is that they're done making Freddy Krueger movies, and because they're done making the movies, the evil entity of Freddy Krueger was wanting to break through into the real world. Like he was starting to call Heather Langenkamp and stuff. And the idea was that whatever elemental evil they had tapped into by making those stories, telling those stories, was almost possessed by that evil. Like some evil, from the past, from the days of yore, found its sort of expression in those stories in the Friday the 13th or in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And so it was kind of confined there. And now that they were done making the movies, the evil was getting out, and it was even contacting the actors, So Freddy, basically, because it was in the form of Freddy, since it was the last form it took. So it was a fantastic, fascinating concept, and the way they defeat it is to make another movie. They're like, well, we got to make another movie. That way he'll stay in the movies. So it was really interesting. It was kind of some meta storytelling Hollywood stuff, but it was also some really cool good versus evil things in there. I thought that was interesting. Let's see here. Got another super chat here from, make sure I didn't miss one. Yep, Studio 96. It said, have you watched the Scary Movie parody films? I've seen parts of the first one. And I mean, some of them are clever parodies. Some of them I've heard about too are just really dirty and weird. I don't know. I'm not really a fan of parody. To that degree anyway. They did the superhero movies, they did, the Not Another Teen movies, and, stuff like that. So those guys did a lot, or that idea or theme survived. I don't know. I think, I just couldn't see sitting down and watching a whole movie that's nothing but a parody of this genre. And not just being a parody of a genre, that's great, but like there's no original story to the Scary Movie stories. It's just one parody after a famous horror film after another, after another, after another. And, you think back in the days of like National Lampoon, our classic comedies, from the 70s and 80s, you had commentary and you had parody, straight up parody of things in the real world, but they at least told some sort of original story themselves, the Griswolds on vacation or whatever, and you can parody this or that, so, yeah. I thought it was so if you liked them, that's fine. I'm not like, totally anti the scary movies. Just didn't really appeal to me. See what's going on here. Oh, see, Ghost Planet Maxine told you got the first 3 Screams on VHS tape. Yeah, VHS it's something that I don't really collect a lot of anymore, because there is a real thing such as rot, in videotapes, and you try and keep them, and I've got a few. I do have some. I have Young Einstein. I've never been able to find it on DVD. I'm sure it's out on DVD somewhere now, but for a while it wasn't. It was only on VHS, so I've got that. And I do have a VCR, but DVDs are kind of my main go-to. I don't need 4Ks or anything, but just a good DVD, maybe Blu-ray if I'm really splurging, but usually DVD is just fine. Let's see here. Ed Starr, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate that. Very generous super chat. So my favorite horror monster films play out like a mystery movie, as the audience is drawn into solving the puzzle of who or what is killing around the city. Yeah, those are great. Scream was like that. What puts me, or your comment puts me directly in mind of The House on Haunting Hill, the classic Vincent Price movie. I think they did a remake of it, which I'm sure wasn't as good, but yeah, that kind of gothic mystery. It's a whodunit with a supernatural element. I like those too. I like those a lot. Whether it's a ghost story or whether it's some sort of monster killer. And that, talking about parodies, that reminds me of you guys ever see The Haunted Honeymoon? It was a Gilda Radner and Gene Wilder film. Dom DeLuise was in it. That was great. That was a cool way to do sort of a parody of like those old radio horror shows. Yeah, it was interesting. I really liked that movie a lot, actually. It was fun. I love classic radio drama, so anything that kind of taps into that. I really liked Radioland Murders, too, from the 90s. That was good. I love listening to Sirius XM Classics and all the old classic radio shows. Westerns, horror, or superheroes. It's good stuff. Let's see. Yeah, I heard about this. Imaginative hobbyist, fun bit of yeah. Robert England Freddy helped out in making original Halloween. He helped Mark Hamill audition for Star Wars. I didn't know about the Mark Hamill audition for Star Wars, but yeah, they shot the original Halloween. It's supposed to be Halloween time in like Illinois, but they shot it in California, so they needed it to look like fall. So they had a lot of fall leaves, and they had like leaf wranglers who were to blow the leaves across the scene or arrange it or pick it up when they were done. And Robert Englund was one of those people for that. On when he talks about that in some interviews, I didn't know that part. But yeah, it is fun to kind of think of that Freddy worked on the first Michael Myers movie. Samuel Proctor says, speaking of rot, everyone should test their Warner Brother DVDs. Oh yeah, and the Warner Home Media really screwed up making them from 2006 to 2010. They made one so bad they're rotting way faster. I heard about that. Yeah, I try and keep mine in. I haven't always kept all of my physical media in clean, dry places, or not clean, but uh, dry, sort of temperature controlled places. Sometimes they've had to be in sort of storage of questionable humidity in the summer, but now they're in all clear and everything works fine. Everything that I have. So yeah, I remember when DVD came about, it was like these things are indestructible. They'll never, and then when people were like DVD rot too. So yeah, but apparently Blu-rays last a little bit longer. Apparently 4Ks are supposed to last longer than that. So um looking at some of the chats here. Yeah, I agree, Ghost Planet. Yeah, keep your boxes in safekeeping. Nathaniel Lewis. See. People talking about Scream. Fanman did some videos on Scream. I didn't bother seeing any more after 2. I loved the first one so much. I thought it was such a cool idea because that's how to do it's not, it wasn't parody, but it was sort of like, it was parodying in some ways, but it wasn't like Scary Movie levels of parody, which was why it was so weird to see Scary Movie try to parody Scream. It was Wes Craven coming back and doing what he does great, best on screen, and you had a cast and even killers inspired by the movies, by horror movies. So it was interesting, and it was going to make some self-referential references and everything. That movie was a big deal. When did it come out? Was I in high school or just out of high school? Can't remember. But yeah, it was a big deal when it came out. Really cool soundtrack on Scream too. They were on when they first screamed. I meant Scream TOO. Yeah, cool soundtrack on that as well. I saw the second one and I was kind of ticked off that Randy got it. I didn't like that. Um, and I thought the idea of the killer at the end was kind of interesting, but no. So I didn't even bother watching Scream 3. And I know they did like a whole series without Ghostface because they couldn't get the rights. And I don't know, there have been probably 4, 5, 6, 7 for all I know now. I know there have been a few more. 1996, thank you. Yeah, so I'd have been 16 or 17, depending on what month it came out. Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to a lot of movies by myself. I started doing that in high school, and I've still done that. I don't really go to movies at all anymore because I can't stand idiots in the movie theaters. But man, I used to go to films all by myself all the time. And I remember friends like, that's so sad. Oh, tell us next time you're going. I'm like, no, thank you. What do I want you chatterboxes along for? I'm here to watch a movie. I'm not here to chat or react to the film with my friends and feel a community experience. No, I'm there to. I want to forget the world around me exists when I'm just zoned into a movie, especially in the theater. My old man bladder won't let me do that for 2 hours straight just anymore. That was TMI. But I don't want to chat. I don't want to I want to watch the movie. And man, I used to love going to movie theaters. It's so sad you just can't. I mean, it's a gamble. I mean, you can try to go at an earlier time or an off day, but you never know. You've paid like what, 20, $30 to get in there, certainly if you get anything to eat or drink. And it can always be some chucklehead comes in and just might as well just take your money and rip it up because he ruins any experience you're going to have there. So yeah, I'm not big on that. I never watched the. I heard it went kind of an agenda ridden too. The BBC Dracula, the like of recent years, like within the last 5 years or so, I think. Um, or maybe it was more than that. I don't know. Time's starting to roll together, but I did like. I liked. I grew up in the '90s in the Dark Shadow miniseries that they brought. It was kind of like a miniseries slash, like they were trying to make it a show. That was really cool. I remember watching that and thinking, this is the coolest idea ever. And then, parents were telling, people were telling me, oh, it's actually a remake of a classic, soap opera of all things from the 60s. So I went back and watched the original Dark Shadows, and they're so good. I mean, it's soap operas, so it's, melodrama or whatever. But just the feel, the gothic feel, Dan Simmons or Dan Curtis really did, he wanted a gothic story on television and a gothic drama, that would keep unfolding. And it wasn't even a vampire. Barnabas Collins didn't even come in until the second season. At first, it really was just sort of a gothic murder mystery kind of idea. But of course, Barnabas Collins coming in, Jonathan Freed was a big part of that. A great vampire, another really great, and that was straight up Dracula. Really based on Dracula. But Jonathan Freed's Barnabas Collins really did a lot to add a lot of pathos to the character of Dracula. So I don't think we would have had Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula movie. I don't think we would have had that Bram Stoker's Dracula movie if there hadn't been a Dark Shadows, original classic Dark Shadows. Jonathan Freed was so good at that. Quentin the Werewolf. They did a couple movies, I think, even after the series. Samuel Proctor says there's a vintage theater in my area. A local couple bought and is reviving by playing classics. That's awesome. Ben-Hur, The Birds, Arsenic and Old Lake. That's great. Yeah. I wish we had more things like that. We do have some drive-ins within reasonable driving distance of me, which is great. I like the driving experience, but they tend to play just new movies. They don't really often play good classics. But I'd love to have a good movie theater that played classics. Because now it's like it has to be a big paid event, a big special deal, which is great. This movie, Back to the Future, is coming back to the big screen or whatever. But yeah, that's cool to know. See, Nathaniel Loseball said, if you end up watching Godzilla vs. Kong, or Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire, look forward to your analysis. I will watch it. I really do want to watch it, Nathaniel. I just don't know if I'm going to bother getting to the movie theater to watch it, but it'll come out on Amazon or something like that. Is a thing. Even before it hits DVD, it usually comes out in some way like that. So I'll watch it eventually. I got to get this chat because good point. Leia Plus Size said, ever watched True Blood? They had a take on vampires among us, some good, some bad. And I think you continued your comment with, oh no, that's the same one. I did watch I watched into the second season of True Blood. It was a cool idea. I mean, you could tell it was like it was Twilight before Twilight, but it wasn't Twilight levels at all. My goodness, no. It's actually a really, it started out as a lot of, at least the Showtime series had a lot of the atmosphere. I never read the novels the lady wrote, the Sookie Stackhouse Chronicles, I think, or Mysteries, I think it's called or something. But the story was cool that first season. It was a murder mystery, and the idea of vampires actually being real and being in society, it was interesting. It was kind of, it could have gone way too far on that and made it sort of a direct allegory of desegregation or something like that, which they didn't bother going that far, which was good. But set in, it wasn't Louisiana. It was in some Georgia swamp or something like that, little town, Alabama. I don't know, but it was good cast. I stopped watching in the second season because when they brought the werewolves in, the werewolves were just little actual literal wolves. I'm like, you had a shapeshifter in the first season who could turn into a dog. No, but werewolves are really bad guys. Like it wasn't a good representation, and I think they just didn't want to have to pay for special effects to make like big wolf men. But I'm never a fan of werewolves who literally turn into actual dogs, like actual wolves. Um, you can do more than that. You can do better than that. So, yeah, True Blood had some interesting scenes or just interesting elements. Ultimately it was what it was. It was on the road to the things that became Twilight. So, yeah, it didn't really. Plus, it got super gay by the second season. I mean, there was always, some sort of homoerotic thread to, a modern vampire story, right? But my goodness, by the second season, it was like, could you show me a man's butt anymore? Come on. And apparently, it had like a big gay following or whatever. So they were like playing into that or something. I don't know. Got a little weird. Let's see what else is going on in the chat here. Actually, I just looked at the time. I'm going to have to wrap up here in a few. It's about my expiration date when it comes to streaming. Oh, yeah, plus you stopped watching True Blood after the fourth season because it got stupid. Yeah. I couldn't even hang in there that long. Although maybe I did watch the end of season 2 because I liked the idea of the Maynard. I thought that was a cool idea, and really cool how they took her out at the end. Dionysus, the Maenads, and everything. That was an interesting monster creature or whatever to bring in. So maybe I did watch the second season. I think I stopped after that. So who knows? Before I'm still wrapping up here with a few comments, but before I forget, let me mention that my dear Sound Engraver is streaming tomorrow, I think at 5:45. I think she set the stream up. I think she put it in the chat here somewhere at one point. So, interesting. Samuel Proctor, you said you saw Gone with the Wind last week for the first time. It was amazing. At the end, a girl by me said, "That girl is the worst." And I replied, "She's worse in the book." Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a great, wonderfully shot film. It's a gorgeously shot movie, and it is a classic for a reason in film history. I can't stand the story. Not like I don't mean like it's written badly. I mean that Scarlett O'Hara, like you're saying, yeah, girl is worse. She's worse in the book. I know she's just awful. I never understand how women are like, oh, she's our hero. She did what she had to do, and yeah, become a raging biatch. I mean, it's just like, no, thank you. I never understood people who are like, Scarlett's my girl. Okay. But it's always good to go back to the classic. I mean, classics. Whether it's film noir or classic films, classic cinema in some which way. I really think people need to prioritize going back and watching a classic, even if you're not a person who maybe you do watch stories, you do watch movies, but you need them to kind of be this certain at least in color or something like that. No, man, stretch your horizons. Every now and then it's so important to go watch a classic movie from at least by this, as far back as the 60s, but certainly earlier than that, 50s and 40s. 40s made the best movies. Man, the 40s movies were great. All the film noir and stuff. That's good stuff. As part of my deep dive on Fright Night, I actually went back and because he was a little bit inspired, Tom Holland had just done a film called Cloak and Dagger, which I watched. And that was a remake of a 1939 film, I think, called The Window. It starred the guy who, Peter Pan. It starred him, the Peter Pan voice. And it was a really good little film noir. And it was kind of like you saw where Hitchcock was somewhat influenced by that for Rear Window. So the whole theme of gazing at your looking in on your neighbors when you're not supposed to be, but seeing something there that, oh my gosh, that's a murder. Oh my gosh, I need to do anything. You can see where that falls directly into Fright Night too, because it's okay. Let's look out your window on your neighbor, and it's not just somebody murdering somebody; it's a vampire biting someone's neck. So really cool idea. But yeah, it took me all the way back there to those classic films. You got it. You can't be a good storyteller. I don't care what your medium is, whether it's through prose, art, or comics, or visual, whatever. You can't be a good, effective storyteller worth your salt and not really delve into the classics, or have an understanding, where your craft came from and how it evolved through those classics. I think that's just so important. So, I see my camera has been quite glitchy tonight, but no worries. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here now. Samuel Proctor says, as I've been watching the classics, I think I've been realizing that the 30s are my favorite decade in movies. Oh, studio era in the early talkies. That's right. The studio era was classic. That's pretty good too. You should go check out some of Hitchcock's early stuff over in London. He did some stuff there that's pretty good. What was oh shoot, I can't remember the name of one of them that he did. Was pretty good. Might have even been one of his first. I don't know. I did a whole course on Hitchcock where I just really went through and like watched every movie of his and did sort of a deep dive into it. It was good. All right, so thank you guys for hanging out tonight. Sorry I wasn't exactly on point, but I had the ideas. They all came out. They just came out in a weird order. It was just sort of a hangout. Like I said in the description, just sort of a laid-back chat about this, something I've been thinking about lately with doing the research for the Fright Night. I think I started to say this at the beginning, so I'll just kind of finish up with it now. The one thing I haven't really read yet is that Origins Tom Holland, or I haven't finished it anyway, the Tom Holland Origins novelization, that he was setting up his own, kind of platform to continue to tell more stories. I did order recently a really cool, they did it through BackerKit, collection of the Fright Night comics, because there was a Fright Night comics. There was a Fright Night video game actually where you could play as Jerry Dandridge going through the house trying to bite people. That was kind of fun. But there's some comics that came out by some talented creators, and Tom Holland gave his blessing to those. So that's like, I don't know if he was involved in the basic story or whatever, but they put them together in a really cool hardback edition that I got that looks like a VHS tape with like the original Fright Night, art on or something and stuff like that. It looks pretty cool. I haven't gotten it yet, but I've ordered that, so I'm going to review those as well. And I'll probably review the Tom Holland novelization if it's different enough from the original novelization. So there we go. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out. More to come. I'll have some video cutouts and some more stuff. We'll be back for another live stream, and the book study streams are coming back in just a week or two here. More to come. I am going to go rest my fried and frazzled brain, and hope you guys have a good weekend. Until next time, keep enjoying digging deeper into the true blue hero stories you love.